episode 4 of Next in Queue. I am your host, Rob Dwyer, and joining me today, I really don't have any title other than CX expert for this man, Jason Scott Livingston. Welcome to Next in Queue. How are you?
Good, thanks, man. Yeah, no title here. Let's just keep it easy.
You and I actually met at a digital event. Of course, the last year has been a lot of digital events, and we happened to be attending the same session of a digital event, and I think both of us kind of were taken aback by something that someone suggested in that event. And we both kind of chatted in there, and then I think maybe you hit me up on LinkedIn, and then we chatted there for a little bit, and it was great getting to know you then. And the more that I have spent time just kind of looking at your history, the more fascinated I am. So one of the things that I have told people in the customer experience industry or the contact center industry is that it can allow for some amazing travel opportunities. And sometimes it allows for you to actually live in some amazing different places. So we don't have to cover it all, but let's talk about some of the different places that you've traveled throughout your career and lived.
Yeah, I mean, part of CX anyway, I mean, because there's so many components to good customer service. You always got to consider where to place, your CS support. And so as a result of that, you typically end up traveling. That's really short-sighted. You'll see those companies that they set up their CX team in San Francisco, and you're like, okay, yeah, that's not going to scale, right? You're not going to retain anybody because you're not going to be able to pay them enough. But
Right.
So, as part of that, you're going to move around, and I've been with CX for long enough that, I've gone through the India phase, the Philippines phase. So I've spent time in both of those places quite a bit. But yeah, I grew up in Mexico City, and I got the bug even as a young man, as a teenager. And, I just was like, man, I want to do this. So anytime there was an opportunity to do anything international, I jumped on it. And so, I date myself going back to AOL days. I ended up making that really clear, and so helped them open up their Indian call center, and then ended up in Luxembourg running, German, French, and their UK CX platforms for AOL, until they kind of sold all that off, and ended up back in the States again, and then I eventually ended up with a little company called BioWare, which now got gobbled up by EA. It's a big gaming company. They make some pretty awesome stuff. And I was sitting in Austin, and I'm like, guys, there's some pretty great opportunities in Ireland, and we need English speakers. And well, I mean, it's really hard to get upset with an Irish accent as an American, right? So when you're talking to a CS agent, he's got that cute little Lucky Charms thing going on. It's really hard to yell at him, and so I'm like, man, this is a no-brainer. CSAT's built in with the accent. So, but that isn't really the reason we ended up there. There was a lot of other, reasons behind it from a kind of financial strategic perspective. But I ended up having to relocate and spend a few years over there, and then. I worked for a global company called CordStrap that offices all over the planet, and I was home 1 week a month for that. And then when I wasn't at home, I was either in the Netherlands or Germany, or I mean, you name it. I mean, we had a site in Dubai. I was just all over the place. And then I got tapped to go work for Coupang in Korea, and I spent a couple years in Seoul, which was fantastic. And now I just live in boring old California.
Boring old California.
Yeah.
So I have a few questions, but I understand that you speak another language as well.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's always interesting because people are like, well, how? So, yeah, I learned a little Spanish because I grew up there, and then like I said, my last 3 years of high school in Mexico City, but I went to a private school, so I spoke English all day. So my Spanish sucked. I didn't really learn it very well. But I'm a member of a church that a lot of people have heard of, Latter-day Saints, Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints. Anyway, you've seen those dudes on the bikes, with the little name tags. When you're 19 or 18, you're supposed to go out for 2 years. So I did that. I ended up getting sent to Russia. So I spent 93 to 95 living in Russia, which was a total shock and amazing
I bet.
experience. But you live like a Russian for 2 years. You speak pretty good Russian when you come out of the other end of that. And then somehow I got married and convinced my wife to go back there with me because it was the Wild West of Russia at that time, and we lived there from '97 to 2000, and that was a crazy great experience. So yeah, I'm not. I used to be pretty fluent, but out of practice. So
Right. Yeah.
I could say something in Russian if you like for the Russian viewers, but мой язык как старая машина, очень сложно начинать его, но когда идет, no, это неплохо. So I basically just said my Russian's like an old car. It's really hard to get it started, but once it warms up, then it goes pretty good. So yeah,
Huh.
so that's my Russian.
Nice, like a Lada, huh? Just that the old car?
Oh yeah, the Lada. Oh yeah, I got or Zhiguli. I like the Zhiguli the best, man. That car was awesome. That's their 4-wheel drive vehicle. That thing was think of like a Kia Sportage, like the old model, and then even shrink it smaller, and then make it like 10 times tougher. And that's the Zhiguli. It was an amazing little car. Anyway, yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. I took German in high school and college, and then had no real reason to use it. I wish I would have taken Spanish actually, but I went to Europe a couple of years ago. We actually stayed in Germany, in Berlin. And I'll tell you what, it's amazing how quickly, I shouldn't say quickly because it was like 20 plus years for me, but yeah, it disappears in a hurry. By the end of like a week there, I finally had some pidgin German working where I could like talk to a cabbie.
Yeah, that's awesome. It kind of comes back over time. It's in there somewhere. And yeah, I joke with, I've got 3 children, and my kids grew up in all these crazy places. Like my son, he spoke Luxembourgish, better than he spoke English at one point. And, he would speak to our, the nanny there all day long in Luxembourgish. Now he doesn't remember any of it, but I told him that, that's the thing. Like when you're young and if you get that kind of Play-Doh-y language, exposure, I think it wires your brain a certain way. And so when we lived in Korea, he was really able to pick up Korean really fast. And yeah, he's been able to take advantage of that skill. But yeah, it's one I envy in people because I worked my butt off learning Russian, and I've had to keep it up. But I can't speak Spanish to save my life because the only thing that comes out is Russian now. So it's really, my parents were living in Mexico after I finished in Russia. And so as a 21-year-old kid, I flew home from Russia to Mexico, and I'm out with my dad, and he's having these meetings, and I'm meeting people, and I can totally understand what they're saying. I'm como un perro, yo entiendo, no hablo español. I'm like a dog. I speak, but I understand, but I can't speak. Right. And so, yeah, I'm sitting there, and I totally knew what they were saying. I wanted to respond, but the only thing that would come out of my face was Russian. It was really frustrating. So, but yeah, it's a pretty cool thing. Anyway, let's enough about me. Let's talk about Rob, and let's talk about CX.
Oh man, this podcast is not about me. It's always about you. So, I'm curious. Obviously, right? You've stayed in this industry for a long time. What is it about CX that drives you? I mean, what makes you passionate about it?
Well, I think, everything's an evolution, and life is undulation, ups and downs. And so, there were times where I was ready to throw in the towel and never work for CX again. And I think every call center agent has gotten to that point at some point in their career, and you kind of lose the magic. But I think it's really been interesting because this year alone, I think I've really crystallized it down into 3 points, and it's kind of evolved into this. My earliest exposure was on a program management side with AOL, and it was kind of an accident. It's not like I intended to end up in CX. I was actually doing kind of business development and sales and working in, this dates me, but working kind of in the currency space because, this is before the euro. And so I was working for a company that was partnering with PayPal to basically allow people to do cross-currency purchases and set up their website, be able to take payment in whatever currency they wanted to across Europe and Asia. So it was a huge departure for me, but I had a friend who worked at AOL, and he said, dude, come in and interview. I think you'd be great here. And so I ended up interviewing, and he I didn't realize, but he was the head of HR for the CX group. And so that was kind of what I ended up interviewing for. But, I was there for AOL for a really incredible experience in time, which is, and they're kind of famous for that barrier to cancel I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember that. There was
Oh
a
yeah.
huge class action lawsuit. You can still go watch the YouTube video of Mr. Ferrari who called in. That literally is his last name, and basically recorded the call. And he's sitting there screaming into the phone over and over and over, cancel my account. I don't know if you remember this. It was on all of the news channels. But I mean, I'm laughing because that was our policy. Like, you as a sales agent, they had to say the word cancel 3 times before you were allowed to action the account. That was the rule, and which is insane, right? And so
Yeah. Yeah.
this whole negative approach and this whole reactive response, it kind of crystallized in my mind how not to do CX. So sorry, AOL, but that's really a lot of what I took away from them. And I, early in my career, I worked on a program, and this is way before, like the trend for big data and AI, but we were pulling data from AOL, and because AOL was more than just an ISP. We were a community. We had a whole
Yeah.
internal network, of websites and content. And so we could track what you were doing. And so we started putting together what we called the retention buddy, which is when you called to cancel, we would then look at you as a profile and say, hey, this guy never uses this feature, but he's prone to use this feature. So if we tell him about it and give him a free month, he'll use it, it'll become sticky, and he'll stay.
Sure.
And I'm like, this is stupid. If we know this, why aren't we telling them now before they call us? Like, why are we waiting till someone is ready to walk out the door to try to sell them on what is great about us? So, that switch from reactive to proactive, I think, was just the first key step. And, you talk to anybody who works in this space, and unfortunately for years, it's getting better now because of the real push, and CX is the new marketing battlefront. Everybody can see that, and people are starting to get wise to that, and so it's changed a lot. But it used to be that CX was like the least thanked part of the organization that existed. Like, you were like the lowest common denominator. Nobody cared about you unless something was wrong, and then they wanted to come yell at you. But it didn't matter all the victories you had, because no one, you were a cost center. People didn't understand the value that CX brought. So and I fought against that for years, and I really tried to look for companies that got the fact that, we needed to lean in and create a better relationship with customers. So the first key thing was that proactive, reactive. And then, the second one was finding that method of communicating that message, which is that CX is actually an investment, that, it's an opportunity to create what is now termed as customer success, which is, I think, a misnomer, because it's kind of turned into a term for the sales team, which it's not, or after sales team, or inside sales. If you look up in Wikipedia the definition of customer success, it talks about, the very first sentence talks about how, this is the organization, or the part of the organization that's focus is to make sure that the company is getting the company is getting the maximum benefit they can out of the customer, and vice versa. So the customer is getting the absolute maximum value they can from that company. So it's nurturing that relationship. And so to me, when you read that definition, that's CX, through and through. And so to me, customer success is that. And so that kind of is the second then. And then the third one this year, which is really crystallized, comes from my experience with Coupang, which is there's so many black holes out there. And what I mean by that is, so many companies have just gotten so accustomed to their certain protocols and policies that they can't see the forest from the trees. Like, they're just so blind. I'll give you a great example, and this is an old one, but I did a little consulting years ago for a group called Pace Harmon. They're a DC-based consultancy firm. They deal more on kind of data center and tech side, but they had an interesting contract with Fannie Mae. President Obama had come out with this new program, Making Homes Affordable. As you guys remember, if you had a Fannie Mae or a Freddie Mac loan, you could check to see if you were eligible, and if you were, you could like refinance and get this great reduced rate. And so Fannie Mae went from, they had this outsourced call center in Salt Lake City through one of their clients, or through a third party, and they got 10,000 calls a month, and they went from 10,000 calls a month to 10,000 calls a day as soon as this protocol went into place. And they're like, oh, we want you to come in and do a review of our contract. Are we with the right partner? How do we negotiate better terms? Because we need to be able to handle this massive volume as long as this program continues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, I spent 6 weeks doing a deep dive, reviewing their contract. I flew out to Salt Lake, spent time with them, spent time in DC at Fannie Mae's headquarters, talking to the owner, like the head of their CS group. At the end of the day, the diagnosis was super simple. I told him to switch to web pages. Essentially, what happened is when you go to Fannie Mae's website, there was a front page that said, "Hey, making homes affordable, CARE Act from President Obama. Call here to see if you're eligible. Click here to put the information in." So it basically had the phone number on the very first page in huge letters, and then if you click to the next page, it had the form that you had to fill out to see if you were eligible.
Right.
And the great irony is, what was happening is when the phone rang at the at the outsourcer, they would literally go to that website, go to the second page, and type in for the customer the information. And I'm like, just switch them. And so, and they switched those 2 pages, and their call volume went back to normal immediately, like instantaneously, overnight. And they spent $1 million probably with Pace Harmon to figure out that their web pages were out of order. But that's what I mean. Like, you're just so blind to your processes that you miss the obvious thing. And sometimes it's not the obvious thing. Sometimes it's just stuff you've learned to live with. Like, how many companies do you know? They know their top 10 cancellation reasons or their top 10 call drivers, and they're the same call drivers for 5 years. Like, what are you doing to stop that? And that's the black holes I'm talking about, where you've just learned to live with things, or you have issues that you can't even see, that if you can solve, you're going to delight the customer and you're going to extend that relationship and truly deliver on success for the company. So those are kind of my 3 key, I guess, mission statements around CX that have kept me going in this space forever. And I think the other thing that I would just throw out there too is I've been really fortunate to jump around to various industries. Like, I've worked in the ISP space, gaming space, blue collar strapping and shipping space, e-commerce, cutting edge, massive growth, 100% a year. Unicorn coupon. So, I've just been able to do so many things. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to that core principle of how are we managing the relationship with the customer and treating it the way we want, and treating them the way that they want to be treated and growing that relationship. So anyway, I talked too much on that. So let's go ahead.
You didn't. I mean, really, that proactive approach, you are so spot on the money there that, I think this is true of any of the companies that you think about that have a really loyal following. One of the measures, and it's often people use it the wrong way, and that's NPS, Net Promoter. That can, however, tell you a lot. And the companies that have incredible annually just great Net Promoter scores, I think they are proactive in their CX space, and they're easy to work with. And those are the kinds of companies that people will like brag about, say, yeah, I mean, I'll admit it. All right. I take almost a weekly trip to Costco. Half the time I don't even need anything. Like, I just want to go to Costco. It's stupid. But they're really good with their CX. They're good about communicating with their customers when they need to, and they're good about letting you know what's coming up. It's not, I don't have to worry about if I'm going to go buy something and it's going to go on sale next week, because I know what's going to go on sale.
It's funny you say that, because we met because we were both watching the same webinar online, and the guy was kind of just going on. I can't even remember what the specific subject was. Maybe you do. I just remember that it was so wrong in my mind that I had to say something. And that's the thing. I am getting older, and so I'm turning into a bit of a curmudgeon. I'm like the guy on the porch yelling at yelling at the kids to get off the lawn, especially when it comes to CX, right? I'm starting to lose patience, because I've been preaching this gospel of CX for 20 years now, and people are just barely starting to get it. And there's just no excuse anymore that you can't. I'll give you an example, and this is something I thought of just a few minutes ago when we were talking, and why I got a little distracted, but it's an example I've used a lot, and it comes from a really great social media book I read a few years back, and I'm trying to remember the author's name so I can give him credit, but I can't see the book, so I'm not going to be able to remember. Maybe I'll find it later and email it to you. But he talks about how, 2,000 years ago, when you wanted to buy something, you'd go down to the market, and
Right.
the shopping experience or the purchasing experience, that customer vendor relationship was very different because it was, it was visceral. I mean, it was direct. Like you were talking directly face to face with the company or the person you were purchasing from. But more than that, when you go down to the market and you're going to buy bananas, you could talk to your friends and neighbors and say, "Hey, who has the best bananas today?"
Right.
Because every vendor's going to tell you that their bananas are the ripest. But you could talk to your community, and you had that personal, direct relationship, and it just was such a different experience. And then we created television and radio, and or vice versa, radio then television, and we created commercials, and we started paying these guys called marketers all this money to tell all these great stories, as Seth Godin says, or essentially lied to us, and convince us that this is the best banana in the world. And we believed them for a long time, and then we started to wake up to the fact that, wow, they don't always tell us the truth. Then society as a whole started to realize that marketers lie. So now, and then I don't know if you're familiar with a guy named Pete Blackshaw. He wrote an incredible book, and I recommend it to everybody who's listening to this podcast. It changed my life when it came to CX. It's basically happy customers tell 3 people, unhappy customers tell 10,000. That's literally the title. It's very long. But the concept is essentially, and we've all heard the adage, happy customers tell 3 and unhappy tell 10. His point was, no, now that you got social media,
Yeah.
if I'm happy, I'm probably not going to go blast that out on social media. I may tell a few people, but if I'm unhappy, I'm going to write a song about it, about how Delta breaks guitars or United breaks guitars, and it's going to become a YouTube video and wreck their stock price. Like, it totally changed everything. And he created the consumerist consumerist website, which is gone now, but was awesome. And for a while, they had the Golden Poo Award, where basically they invited the U.S. population to vote on the worst CX companies in the world, and Comcast won for a bunch of years. EA won twice in a row, and yeah, it was pretty bad. But anyway, where I'm trying to get with this is, Bezos figured this out with Amazon and created the ability for people to come online and review books anonymously. And I would challenge you to find anybody who purchases books anymore based on what the book jacket says, because they're going to go read a total stranger's opinion and trust that over anything a marketer writes, because I never buy anything based on what it says on the ad. I go down and read all the public comments, like, this thing's a piece of crap, I bought it, didn't work, or I love this thing, it's great, it did exactly what it said. That's the power of what social media and the internet have done. It's returned us back to the 2,000 year ago model of being able to take the power out of the hands of the companies. And the companies that haven't figured that out yet are the ones that are going to get destroyed. But the ones that go, hey, we got to lean in here. We got to develop this relationship of trust. We got to talk to the customers where they're at. We've got to be honest. We need to engage with the reviews, listen to the voice of the customer, all of that CX work. That's, those are the ones that are going to be able to thrive and survive. So, but anyway, yeah, I can't even remember what your original question was around. Oh, I do remember now, NPS. So it's just funny because, I went from working in ISP and gaming and stuff, and then ended up at Coupang, which is very much like the Amazon model, right? So here my big thing was contacts per million units, so how many contacts am I getting extrapolated out to the millionth unit, right? And the reason that's important is because I may be selling a ton of this item, and the contact volume, if it's a certain threshold's okay, I may I may start selling this item and only sell 10 of them. But if I'm getting, 1 call per 10, that's a pretty, if I sell 1 million of those, what's that going to look like from a call volume perspective? So,
Right.
we had these settings to just kick in. Well, when I joined, my CEO was like, hey, I'm really concerned about what our North Star needs to be around CX and CS. And, I'm leaning towards NPS. Well, it's funny because Amazon doesn't use NPS at all. They actually ignore that as a metric completely. And, so my partner, the guy I was working with who was ex-Amazon, was trying to convince him that that was a bad idea. And I'm not a huge NPS guy myself. I think there's a huge value into it, but only in relationship to when you ask the question, where you ask the question. So
Yeah.
Like we had a post delivery NPS, we had a generic NPS that we would ask to a random subset of customers every year, not based on any interaction. Then we had like a post CS NPS, and those are all very different, right?
Yeah.
But NPS is only really valuable in as far as you compare it to your other metrics, in my mind. And I've always looked at metrics as a three-legged stool when it comes to CS, which is NPS, CSAT, and your internal quality score. Because if your quality, is consistent, you're doing what you're supposed to from a policies and procedures perspective, agents are killing it, and your CSAT's fairly stable, but your NPS is dropping like a rock, well, that may have nothing to do with CS. Your
Yeah.
CEO may have gone online and made a racial epithet, and now everybody hates your company, right? So, it's not specifically connected to you, but like if your NPS is flying up and your CSAT's going through the roof and your quality's dropping like a rock, then your agents are gaming the system and giving away the farm. Everybody's happy when they get free stuff, but
Yeah.
they're violating company policy. So, but anyway, it's interesting to bring that. And then the other key thing about NPS, not to beat it up too much, is it always really bothered me how, you could kill yourself to move your entire customer, or not entire, but a huge subsection of your customer base, from a 3 up to a 4 or even a 5, and it makes zero difference on your score, right? So it's just a hard way to measure actual performance, because if you're trying to see if a program is having effect and you're only looking at NPS, you won't know unless it has a massive effect, and it'll be probably too late, to really understand how that effect took place. So you got to kind of combine metrics in my mind. But anyway, sorry, NPS is a sore subject with me.
No,
you brought it up.
No, I did. It's funny. I wrote a blog post, I don't know, 6 months ago maybe, and it was about specifically, right, surveys in general and how we can use them the wrong way. And I used an example. I actually had a service request at my apartment. Like I don't remember exactly what it was, but something was broken. I needed it fixed, whatever the case was. And afterwards, I got an email from my apartment complex, and it was an NPS survey. And I was like, they were like, based off your recent service request, how likely are you to recommend blah, blah, blah. And I was like, on the list of things that would drive me to recommend a place to live to someone, this service request is really, really, really low on the list. And so, I responded and I'm like, yeah, this really isn't how you should use NPS. Like, I'm not going to answer this survey, but I'm going to tell you that this is a horrible, like, you need to stop.
That's awesome. Please send me that link. I want to read it.
Sure, I will. It's just one of those things where, what I think a lot of organizations at one point in time got really hooked on this, right? And a lot of different things that we do as large organizations are based on trends sometimes, right? And so and so is implementing this NPS program. Okay, well, everybody else is implementing
AI
NPS.
is awesome. Everybody's got to have AI. Yeah.
Everybody's got to have AI. That's the huge buzzword these days. But right, it's all about how you use it, where you use it, when you use it, that is going to make a difference or not. And we have to be very thoughtful about how we approach that. And there's nothing wrong with a survey of any kind, as long as it's done the right way, the right time, for the right reason.
Well said. I completely agree.
Stick around for more of my conversation with Jason Scott Livingston right after this break. It's not your agents. It's not even your training. It's the support when your agents are supporting your customers that your agents don't have. And that's where Happy 2 comes in. We provide custom workflows, responsive scripting, and dynamic contextual help topics to guide your agents when they need it the most, when they're helping your customers. And we designed it with your operations team in mind, not the IT team. When changes need to be made, your ops team makes them and deploys them in minutes. Find out more about how Happy 2 can reduce your training time, reduce your handle time, and increase your resolution at happy2.com. That's HAPPITU.com. And hey, shout out to my good friends, Big Red Horse, who provide the music for this podcast. You can check them out at bigredhorseband.com. You can also find them on YouTube or wherever you stream music. Now let's get back to my conversation with Jason. I want to switch gears a little bit, and this is going to be super unrelated to all of the CX. But one of the things that has kept us in touch a little bit, actually, honestly, and this is a little bit more of a serious subject of a different matter, but so you've got a cabin up in Northern California, and that was under some threat.
Oh yeah.
From the fires, and I saw that you were posting about that. I think for those of us that don't live in that area, don't necessarily think about that kind of thing very often. But I'm wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about just kind of what was going through your head some of those times that you're up there and trying to, take care of things on the outside just to protect that beautiful cabin that you've got.
Yeah, it's really, thanks for bringing that up. We bought it back in November, kind of the height of COVID. We just needed a break. Like, I was losing my mind. I lived in California when I worked for Zynga, and I had drugged my feet my whole career trying to avoid ever living here. Not that there's anything really wrong with California. It's just not my cup of tea. And, working in San Francisco and walking downtown of San Francisco every day was just a real kind of challenge. If you've been there, it's a great place to maybe visit for a short period, but living there is a little bit harder. And I'm probably gonna be banned now, and they're gonna kick me out because somebody's gonna see this. But anyway, I bought this place up north just because I needed a place to get away. And at the time, I was reading a book called Deep Work, which I recommend, which is a really interesting book, and it talks about how some of the most like famous thinkers that we know of, they would do this. Like, they would find this secluded, quiet place where they would just go away to do their deepest thinking. And you got to get to a point of no distraction. And when we got the place, I mean, it's so off the grid that there's no cell phone service at all up there. And my only Wi-Fi connection was through a satellite that I got put in, satellite internet. And I'm waiting on Starlink. I think I told you this, but and hopefully it's going to show up. Elon promised by the end of the year, and I've been signed up since like November, so hopefully it'll show up soon. But I'm on a company called Viasat, and their CSAT's okay. I got to give them that. They're not bad, but satellite internet, so it's got its issues. But I mean, it took like a month and a half to get it installed because I'm so remote. I couldn't get a guy to come out and actually put it in, and so it was for a while. It really was a deep work location because there was zero distractions. I couldn't watch TV. I couldn't, no radio signals up there. But yeah, it is pretty remote. If anybody's listening to this and familiar with Trinity Lake, we're right at the very tippy top of Trinity. And they did have a big fire come through this year. And, it's just funny because I drove back this morning and I was talking to a guy who lives up there this morning at the gas station as I was coming back here. He's going to do some plumbing work on the place for me. And we were talking about, why the fires have increased and where they're at. But just so we're on the same page. So the Monument Fire was the fire that we were under threat from, and it did like 170,000 acres of burn. And like I mentioned, it's really remote up there. And so in that 170,000 acres, it had really only destroyed 6 structures and not a lot of incredible damage. I actually drove up there at 2 a.m. and got past the road closure because there was no one guarding the road closure point. And so I just kept going. And I got up into the fire, and I was surrounded by fire, and I could see the fire truck up there. But it's not like you see in the movies. It was what's considered kind of good burn. It was kind of just burning the stuff on the ground. Every once in a while, it'd shoot up a really dead tree, but it wasn't like spreading through the canopy. And in fact, if you drive out there now, you still get a lot of green. And there are pine trees that the only way the pine cones will open up and release their seeds is if they they burn, you know, and so
Right.
part of burning is kind of part of nature. And this guy I was talking this morning was talking about how part of the issue is that we used to have a lot of grazing. Like you would put animals out there and they
Yeah.
eat all the stuff that's kind of mid-level to low level, so the fire doesn't have a chance to really go up. And you know, we haven't allowed grazing for a long time in some of these areas, and as a result, you get kind of the mid-level growth, which allows fire to shoot up. But anyway, that's not really what happened here. What happened here was they try to do what's called a back burn, where they come in and they use these drones. It's pretty crazy, actually. They take this really pretty cool looking drone, and it has a payload of these like little ping pong balls full of accelerant, basically, you know, a little chemical. And essentially, what happens is it like pricks it and drops in another chemical that causes it to then, like, over a few seconds or whatever, to ignite. And then they drop these strategically because the terrain up there is so remote that you can't really get to it. You know, it's not like you can just drive up there. It's, you know, they call it the Alps for a reason. It's like truly mountainous. So they're using this drone, and the idea was we're going to create a big firewall, or we're going to do a controlled burn. So when the fire gets to it, it'll stop because there's no fuel. But they did it on a bad day, and the wind picked up, and it burned. I mean, it was moving at about a pace of about a mile to 2 miles, you know, per week towards our cabin. And in that one day, it did 7 miles. It just, I mean, it got within 2,000 yards of our place. We were the very last house on our road that didn't take damage. The next house survived, but took damage. And then as soon as you get past that house, it's like something out of a movie. It's just moonscape, black sticks and darkness. I was up there just this week looking at it, and it's really tragic because we know a lot of people that, you know, own their homes. No one past us lives on the grid. They have no electricity. So these are really remote locations. Some of them are really big ranches. There's a corporate retreat up there called Alme Ranch, which is beautiful, was beautiful. So yeah, it's pretty sad, but it's a, you know, it'll take 2 lifetimes probably for that to recover, that section, that scar. But the stuff past it's fine. Like it'll take a year and it'll be back to, you'll never even know there's a fire. But yeah, it is really weird how, you know, California has that. We, you know, I live down in Livermore currently, and last year we had all the fires around San Jose. I mean, everything around us was on fire. With smoke was so bad we couldn't breathe. So we took all our valuables and took them up there. So this year we brought them all back. So yeah, I don't know. California has fires. It's just part of life here, I guess. But anyway, thanks for asking. But yeah, it was pretty nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, I've grown up my life in Tornado Alley, and
Yeah.
that's it's a different kind of thing, right? Because you can't see it coming. I mean, you can, but there's not that kind of long drawn out wait.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching it move for a month, you know. Yeah, exactly.
And you know, I grew up in central Kansas, and you know that there would be times like we'd, you know, sit out on the deck, would watch the clouds, like sirens are going off, and we're idiots, you know, outside. Oh, I think we can see it. But you know, the devastation is just as bad. It's just different, right? It's usually in a very tight corridor. If you get one of those tornadoes, that, you know, they're awful when they come through, but you know, there's just not much you can do, right? You wait for the siren, you go down to the basement or interior room, and that's just kind of what you do. This just seems like such a different thing. And I know, right, regardless of where you live, you've got your own natural disaster just waiting to happen. There's hurricanes on the East Coast, or fires on the West Coast, or whatever the case may be. But it's you know, I'm glad everything's okay, and it was definitely something that I was keeping track of for sure.
Thanks, man. It was an absolute miracle, because that Tuesday, so, you know, Monday was Labor Day, and you know, we got the evacuation order, and they did the order because they were planning on doing the back burn, and they didn't know it was going to happen, and the worst happened. But anyway, so I left, and the next day, you know, my neighbor called me. He's like, "It's all gone." It's because, I mean, and I've heard from them who were still there that, you know, it's louder than a locomotive. Like you could hear the fire. It was so loud, and because it had got up in the canopy, and it was just like you see in the movies, an inferno. It just burned everything. I mean, there's because I drove up there and it, like, ATVs, like little quads.
Yeah, yeah.
I couldn't tell what they were. They looked like railroad cars or something. There's these little four little wheels and this little metal frame. I mean, everything, like you'd see stone foundations, but there was no evidence at all that there was ever a house there. It burned everything to ash, and it was so hot that it just melted stuff. So yeah, it was pretty crazy. And so, like I said, it got 2,000 yards from us. And then fortunately, the wind took it north, kind of popped over the mountain behind us. But the next day, it moved another 1,000 yards closer. So it was only 1,000 yards at that point. And then Thursday, for those of you who are from California, remember, we got this freak rainstorm that no one was expecting, that came out of nowhere, dropped way more rain than anybody predicted, and it just really kind of stopped the thing in its tracks and saved a lot of people, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, I was just on my Blink cameras watching them all night long, waiting for the house to burn down, but it never did. I got to watch the rain instead. I've never been so happy to watch a black screen with little raindrops falling, every once in a while, and listening to those puddles form. It was kind of awesome. But yeah, it is really hard to drive away from a place knowing that it might not be there when you come back, and it's a weird feeling, right? So yeah.
For sure. Well, hey, enough of that. Like I said, I'm glad everything is okay with all of that. You got a new project in the work. Is your new project still in the works? Is this coming along?
Yeah. So I'm not to create competition, but yeah. So
accept the challenge.
Well, hopefully we're complimentary, but yeah. So I've been doing consulting here in the Bay Area for the last 3 years in an area different than CX. And I did it as a personal favor to a friend who owns the consultancy group. And, my wife worked for him years ago when I was actually working for Zynga. We were based here, and we had just come back from Korea. I was living on the East Coast, and he was like, "Hey man, I really need help. I just won this huge bid, $500 million of, bond money I need to kind of manage, and I need help." So it was a real shift for me because I'm doing stuff that I haven't done in a long time, like building websites and creating communication documents and advising, boards and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's still good, and it's been a nice growth process. And I'm doing a bunch of different things for several different clients, but it's not what I love. And Coupon went public in May, and it just made me really miss, building and forming teams and like doing real true CX. And I have a little consultancy called Start with Care. I've got a little sign back here that I've kind of toyed with over the years, and I've worked with several different clients on and off. Recently, I did some advising at Gusto, if you're familiar with that company, and I years ago I did some work for TP because they were trying to kind of figure out a way to go Teleperformance, how they could go from just being an outsourcer to kind of a full stop shop. And and I work with Officium in that regard. But anyway, so I'm leaving that consultancy, and I'm currently trying to find a new role. But I'm taking my time because I want to do something that I really can sink my teeth into. Fortunately, I did really well with Coupang and a few other companies in my past, so I have that latitude. But in the meantime, I've just really felt the pull to start talking more about CX. And my wife said, it's funny because the Start with Care logo, I don't know if you can see it back here, but the on button has that kind of little circle with the line at the top. So I just took the line and made it into a plus, which is kind of the universal sign for first aid or care. With the concept being is that when you're going to turn your company on, make sure you're thinking in terms of how do I support my customers? Because there's way too many companies, Coupang being no exception, who grow so fast and get so far down the line before they even start to think about this, and then you spend years trying to clean up a mess that never should have happened. And I'll give you an example. I did some work with Clutter. I don't know if you've heard of them. They're a startup here in California. They're pretty much across the U.S., I think, at this point, continuing to grow. Their concept was, the traditional storage unit is very flat. You got like U-Haul's built a few that are multi-story, but they're a pain in the butt because how do you get the stuff up there? But most of them are designed so that you drive in, you pull up to your unit, you lift the door, and you load your stuff. And they thought, this is such a huge waste of real estate and space. What if we tried the Amazon model of vertical storage, massive warehouses, and we just barcode all of your boxes? And so when you want to store something, we ship a truck out to you, we pick it up, we take it to our warehouse and sit it on a rack. When you want it back, you go, I want this one back, and you just scan the barcode and they bring it back. Great idea, great concept, very innovative. They've done very well. It's cheaper because you don't have to rent as much space, so it's working really well. The problem is that in the early days, they didn't structure well. And so now they've got customers that are going, hey, where's grandma's piano? And they can't find it, you know? So I want grandma's piano back. And they go to pull it from the warehouse and nobody knows where it is. And now you've got a 50,000 square foot, warehouse with 8 levels of vertical storage, and how are you going to find that piano, right? So they just made some fundamental mistakes in the early days, and the question they were asking me was, well, how do we solve this? And I'm like, you eat the pain. There's nothing you can do here. It's too late. You screwed the pooch. You got to eat your dog food. You made it. You got to eat it. And so now they're living with that pain. But here's the lesson: never do it again. Get it right. Figure out what caused the problem and make sure it never happens again, and build forward, and then deal with it going backwards. So, but just, I've lost my train of thought. Well, I can't even remember what the original question was because I got so down the clutter road.
Well, we were going to talk about your podcast, but now
that's where I'm going. Sorry.
Vision of the end of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark in my mind with this warehouse.
Exactly. Where is the Lost Ark, right? Grandma's piano. Anyway, where I was going with that is that this whole start with care and thinking about things in the right way. And so my wife and I were talking the other day. She's like, maybe you should just start doing a kind of a basics podcast on the basics of CX. And call it CXRX, right? Like the prescriptive nature of CX. And it kind of goes with the plus and the first aid concept. And a buddy of mine who works at an outsourcer now, but used to do a lot of communications work and sales work for Teleperformance back in the day. His name's Rory Stark. He's an amazing guy. He's like, yeah, you should even get like a lab coat. And when you do your podcast, like you could even go speak and talk about it and stuff. Anyway, it got a little silly, but the point is that I'm going to try to keep it really simple. It's not going to be kind of what you do. I think what you do is really fascinating. I've enjoyed the podcast so far. It's really going to be more kind of a customer service 101, and because there's way too many people out there who don't know what they're doing. There's way too many companies that go, oh, you were an agent on the last product we launched, so why don't you go run the whole program for the next one? And to me, it's just really ironic. I'm studying accounting right now in an MBA program, and there's these standard best practices that everyone adheres to worldwide, right? There's accounting practices that everybody follows because it's just been universally agreed that is the way things should work. And it's ironic and crazy to me that we haven't got the same set of concepts and principles around CS in the world today, because there are just core fundamental, like if you don't have a workforce management model, then you're screwed. You're going to spend way too much money. You're going to be inefficient. If you don't have a single source of truth in a knowledge base, you're done. If you don't have some kind of a cloud-based, CRM platform to where you can manage your customer information that works across your whole organization, you're limiting yourself. So there's just these core things that I feel like there's a potential just do a kind of a light and easy podcast, kind of a Khan Academy of CX. So that's the idea. I'm hoping to kind of get it launched here in the next couple of weeks now that I've got the latitude with me moving off of these contracts. So we'll see how it goes. I may be hitting you up for help. Hey, how do I do this?
You can absolutely do that. I'm excited for it. I think it's a great idea, and I'm definitely looking forward to it. So I will also make sure that we put a link to Start with Care in the liner notes. So anyone checking out the podcast, whether you're on YouTube or you're listening to it wherever you get your podcast, you can absolutely go check that out. You know what? It's been great having you on. It's been absolutely great.
I talk too much, man. I'm sorry about that, but I love the stuff just like you. And that's the thing. Like you started the questions off with like, how do you keep the passion around CX for 20 years, and you just have it or you don't. And you have it, I know, because we met through CX, right? Talking about our fundamental problem with what someone was saying. And, you know, and it's always great when you meet someone else that's in that space and has that same passion. And I felt that the very first time we talked, and then even the second, and that just has grown from there. So this has been just as much a delight for me. I'm not as probably fancy as some of your other guests. I don't have a book I'm peddling or, like a cool title at this point. It's really just more about a passion. But yeah, I appreciate the start with CareLink. If anybody's looking for help or just wants to talk, that's what I do. And I know that the company you're associated with does some pretty awesome stuff too. So hopefully that
I appreciate that.
drives some direction.
You know what? I do want to just put out there, like, and this applies to all future guests of the podcast. I just like meeting interesting people, right? I love having a great conversation with you, learning more about you. I was at, ICMI had their contact center digital expo. It's today and tomorrow. And so I spent most of the day just networking there. And, I'm telling people regularly, like, I just want to get to know you. Like, I'm not trying to sell you anything. If you're interested in what we do, I'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. But really, I just want to get to know more people. I think that's the best part about the business that we're in. It's probably the best part of most businesses is the people that you work with or the people that you get to know. And so the guests that I'm looking for, I tell them all, like, I'm not chasing a title. Quite honestly, I don't even want it to be a commercial necessarily. Like, I just want to have a conversation that's interesting, that other people may get some insight out of. And, we can spend some time just having fun and getting to know each other. So,
well, anybody who's got, the Beatles made out of Legos behind them has got to be incredibly interesting. So, I mean, the very first time we ever talked, I'm like, okay, I gotta hear the story. Like, where are these coming? Because that's just awesome. But I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been great.
Well, so everyone who's not on YouTube, you can check out one of my videos on LinkedIn or YouTube, and you can see the Beatles. Yes, they're Lego, and it makes me happy. So,
and you put them together, right?
I put them together. I got one as a gift, and I was like, well, okay, now I got to get 3 more of these because
I got to ask, the Lego Movie question. So did you super glue them down, or are they?
No.
Oh, there you go.
No.
Okay, very nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
No super glue because not that I ever plan on taking them apart, but you just never know, right?
That's right.
Just
well,
never
that's
know.
good. Let's start calling you Emmett. You're the special man. That's awesome. All right, dude.
All right, JSL. Hey, it's been great having you on, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks for joining me on Next in Queue.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have you back on my side if I ever get this podcast thing going, and have you buddy up, and maybe you can take a subject piece for me and run with that.
I'm down.
Education. So yeah, that'd be awesome. Thanks, man. Well, yeah, I'm game to talk anytime, and it was awesome.
All right, fantastic. Well, thanks, and we'll talk again soon.
All right, cheers.